On Christmas Eve in Chicago, a little girl crouched in the snow behind the church, whispering, "She calls it discipline, but it hurts." A billionaire passing by stopped in his tracks, and from that moment on, both their lives would change forever. If stories of healing, redemption, and second chances touch your heart, consider subscribing and staying with us until the final chapter. Snow blanketed Chicago like a quilt stitched in silence, each flake soft yet heavy as it drifted down onto Michigan Avenue. The streets glimmered with the kind of light only Christmas Eve could summon. Lampposts crowned with wreaths, windows shimmering with tinsel, and the distant bells of Holy Name Cathedral tolling against the night. For most, it was a night of warmth and family, of laughter rising from fire-lit living rooms. For Nathaniel Nate Harris, it was simply another night to outwalk the ghosts. At 42, Nate was a man who owned half the skyline, yet felt he possessed nothing at all. The Harris Group's name blazed across glass towers on Wacker Drive and Lake Shore, but his penthouse on the river was silent as a tomb. 3 years had passed since the car accident that had claimed his wife and son. 3 years of empty dinners, untouched wine, and a bed too wide for sleep. Work had become his refuge, and loneliness his only companion. Tonight, he had wandered farther than usual, his polished shoes crunching through snow, his wool coat collar pulled high. He told himself he was simply walking off the silence, yet a heaviness pressed in, the kind that even skyscrapers could not shield. He paused by Holy Name Cathedral, drawn by the sound of a children's choir rehearsing inside. For the first time in months, something fragile stirred in him, the memory of his boy's laughter echoing against a church's high rafters. That was when he heard it. A sound almost too soft to belong to the living, a whimper carried on the icy wind. Nate turned, scanning the shadows behind the church where dumpsters and snowdrifts lay like forgotten tombstones. At first he thought it was a stray cat, but then he saw her. A small figure crouched against the brick wall, knees to her chest, a threadbare coat clinging to her thin frame. A stuffed bear, its fur matted, was crushed beneath her arms. Her breath fogged in the air, ragged and uneven, and her lips trembled with words too heavy for a child. "She calls it discipline, but it hurts," the girl whispered to no one. Nate felt his chest seize. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her, though the sight of him, tall, broad-shouldered, with snow caught in his dark hair, must have seemed like a phantom rising from the storm. "What's your name?" he asked gently, kneeling until his eyes met hers. The child shrank back, clutching the bear tighter. Her eyes were wide, glassy blue like winter itself, yet they held the kind of fear no 7-year-old should ever know. "Lily," she stammered, as though even the right to speak her name was uncertain. "Lily," Nate repeated softly, as though it were a prayer. "Why are you out here alone?" She hesitated, her small hand brushing the bruise peeking from under her sleeve. Her voice cracked like glass. "My stepmother said I was bad. She said I had to stay out here until I learn." Nate closed his eyes for a moment, steadying the rage that boiled beneath his ribs. "Discipline," she had said. But the purple shadow on her skin was not discipline. It was cruelty, wrapped in the silence of snow. He took off his coat, a heavy cashmere worth more than most families' Christmas dinners, and draped it around her shivering shoulders. The coat swallowed her whole, but Lily clung to it as if it were the first safe thing she had touched in months. "You don't have to stay here," Nate said firmly. "Not tonight. Not ever again." Her gaze flickered with disbelief, as if the words themselves were a language she had forgotten. "But if she finds me—" "She won't," Nate interrupted, his voice steady, almost a vow. "I'll make sure of it." The bells of Holy Name tolled again, and for a moment, it seemed as though the entire city paused to listen. Nate extended his hand, snowflakes melting against his bare fingers. Lily hesitated only a heartbeat before slipping her tiny hand into his. It was cold, fragile, yet in that grasp lay the weight of a promise. As he helped her stand, her stuffed bear fell into the snow. Nate bent to pick it up, brushing off the flakes, and noticed how threadbare it was, stitched again and again with clumsy, desperate hands. He placed it back in her arms. "What's his name?" he asked. "Mr. Buttons," she whispered, cheeks pinking. "He's all I have." Nate's throat tightened. "Not anymore," he murmured. "You have me now." Together they stepped onto Michigan Avenue, where the lights burned golden against the dark. Shoppers hurried past with gift bags, carolers sang on the corner, and yet in that river of humanity they walked alone. Bound by a fragile thread, neither of them fully understood. Lily stumbled, unused to the expanse of snow-slick sidewalk, and Nate instinctively steadied her. She looked up at him then, really looked, at the man who seemed too big for the night, too powerful for her tiny world. And in her eyes, Nate saw something he had not seen in years: trust, tentative and trembling, like the first flame coaxed from a match. He tightened his hold on her hand, guiding her toward the direction of his car. Above them, the cathedral bells sang again, their echoes following them down the snowy avenue. For Nate Harris, Christmas Eve had always been a reminder of what he had lost. But tonight, beneath the falling snow and the fragile grip of a little girl, it became something else entirely. The night when loss gave way to a new beginning. And though neither of them knew it yet, this was the first step in rewriting both their stories. The elevator hushed to a stop as if it were holding its breath. Beyond the polished steel doors, a wall of glass opened onto the Chicago River, like a long black ribbon stitched with city lights. Nathaniel Nate Harris swiped his key card, pushed the door, and felt the familiar cool of his penthouse. Marble, glass, and the faint scent of cedar from a candle he never lit but never threw away. Lily's small hand tightened inside his, then vanished. The instant the door clicked shut, she slipped free, dropped to her knees, and scuttled beneath the long glass dining table like a startled fawn. Her stuffed bear, Mr. Buttons, went with her, the button nose scraping the slick floor. The table had always reminded Nate of a sheet of winter ice. Tonight, it became a shelter. Lily pressed her back to the steel pedestal and tucked her knees up, eyes peeking over the edge of the glass like a lighthouse in reverse, shining inward, scanning for storms. "It's all right," Nate said, lowering his voice as though loudness itself could bruise. "You're safe here." Her answer was a soft shiver, and the squeak of Mr. Buttons being clutched too tight. Nate shrugged off his damp coat, then hesitated. The cashmere he'd wrapped around her behind the church still hung off her narrow shoulders, absurdly large, sleeves puddling at her wrists. He found a wool throw by the couch and offered it to the space beneath the table. A pale hand reached out, took the blanket, and vanished. "Are you hungry?" he asked. Silence. A beat. 2. Then the tiniest nod, barely rippling the air. "Chicken soup," he tried. "I can make chicken soup." He heard himself and nearly laughed. He hadn't cooked more than toast since the accident. The kitchen, sleek counters, chrome fixtures, a row of knives like a sculpture, was a display he walked through on his way to coffee, not a place a child would measure safety in spoonfuls. Still, he rolled up his sleeves. The refrigerator yielded stock, carrots, celery, a half-roasted chicken from a meeting canceled earlier that day. He set a pot on the burner and stood very still until he remembered to turn the flame on. Oil snapped, steam rose. He chopped clumsily, the knife knocking against the board like an uncertain metronome. When he minced garlic, the smell lifted and became, to his surprise, something warm. Behind him, the glass table whispered with the shift of a small body. He allowed himself to imagine Lily sniffing the air, tracking the sizzle and simmer like a map. He set water to boil for pasta. "There's a rule," he said lightly, testing the sound of domesticity on his tongue. "In this apartment, no one eats soup without, wait for it, tiny pasta stars. It's actually the law." A rustle. A breath that might have been the ghost of a laugh. He smiled into the steam. "I'm only half joking. My son, Daniel." He stopped. Names were fragile. He stirred, let the quiet fall, then tried again. "He loved the stars, said they were wishes you could swallow and keep." More rustling. A small face appeared above the glass edge, eyes caught by the soft light beneath the range hood, then ducked back under, shy as a sudden sunrise. When the soup settled into a steady simmer, Nate turned, leaned against the counter, and took in the room through Lily's eyes. The penthouse had been designed to impress investors, a double-height living room, floor-to-ceiling windows looking east to the river and west to the nightly constellations of Wacker Drive, a dining table that could seat 14 people who never stayed for dessert. In the corner, under a fitted canvas, sat the piano his wife had loved. He had covered it the day the house became a museum of what once was. Tonight, even covered, it felt less like a reliquary and more like a promise he didn't yet know how to keep. He ladled soup into a white bowl, set it on a tray with a spoon and napkin, and crouched beside the glass table. Lily watched him as a small animal might, present but tense, ready to bolt at a gesture she couldn't decode. He slid the tray toward her and retreated a step. "It's hot," he said. "Take your time." Her fingers emerged first, then the bare, then her thin frame. She sat cross-legged beneath the glass, the bowl in her lap, and lifted the spoon with a seriousness that made his throat ache. Steam curled past her face, fogging the glass above her like breath on a winter window. She put the spoon to her lips, flinched at the heat, and then, very quietly, sighed. The sound was a door unlatching. "Mr. Buttons is a guest of honor," Nate said as though announcing a gala. "He gets a seat." He fetched a linen napkin, folded it into a little square, and placed it beside her. "For him." The corner of her mouth lifted. "He's not hungry." Then, after a sip, "But he likes being invited." "Understood." He nodded gravely. "We'll always set a place." As she ate, he moved to where she had left his coat and lifted it to hang it by the door. A small rectangle slid from the inner pocket and skated across the marble. He bent, picked it up, and felt the world tilt in his hands. A photograph, creased and faded. A younger Lily held by a man with honest eyes and a smile that telegraphed devotion. The man's arms circled the child as if the future itself might try to snatch her away. On the back, in careful block letters, were 4 words: "Daddy forever in heaven." Nate held the photograph the way a diver holds a relic found on the ocean floor, certain it didn't belong to him, certain it mattered. He knelt and showed the front to Lily. "Is this your dad?" he asked softly. Her spoon paused. A cloud passed through her gaze and kept going. "David," she said, the name a bell rung far away. He went to the sky." "I'm so sorry," Nate said, the apology feeling insufficient against the gash of loss. He turned the photo over, tracing the words with his thumb. "Did you write this?" She shook her head. "He did. He said, if I ever get lost, I can show it to a good person, and they'll help me find the sky again. But I think You can't find it. Not with feet. Nate swallowed. Maybe not with feet, he agreed. But sometimes the sky finds us. In small ways. She studied him as if testing the weight of that idea. Then she slid the photograph back into the coat pocket herself, pressing it in deep, like planting a seed. They finished the soup, 2 bowls for Lily, 1 for Mr. Buttons by scent, and 1 for Nate that tasted astonishingly like a reason to keep trying. Afterward, he ran warm water over the bowls and stacked them in the dishwasher, all the while narrating the procedure with humorous solemnity, as if he were reading an instruction manual to a very attentive audience beneath his dining table. By the time he returned to the living area, Lily had inched halfway out from under the glass. Her legs stuck out into the open, socks thin and mismatched, one with faded stars, one with tired stripes. She seemed surprised to see them there, as though her feet had arrived in this life before the rest of her courage. "I'm going to make a call," Nate said gently, "to someone whose whole job is helping children be safe. Her name is Emily Carter. She works with CPS here in Cook County. She's kind. She listens." Lily's shoulders drew up, the shell closing. If my stepmother finds... If she knows..." "She won't," he said, and marveled at how easily the promise came. "I won't let her." He crossed to the window where the river gleamed in long strokes of pewter and light, took out his phone, and tapped the number he had already searched on the elevator. The line clicked. A calm voice answered, warm despite the hour. "Cook County Child Protection, this is Emily." "Ms. Carter?" Nate said, keeping his tone measured but unable to keep the urgency from threading through. "My name is Nathaniel Harris. I'm calling about a 7-year-old girl. She's safe with me right now, but she has visible bruises, old and new. She was left outside behind Holy Name Cathedral tonight." A pause, the kind that says someone has turned fully toward you. "Is the child with you, Mr. Harris?" "Yes." "Is she in immediate danger?" "Not at this moment. The apartment is secure, but her stepmother, Veronica Hayes, may try to contact or retrieve her. There were threats." Another quiet beat. Then Emily's voice, steady as a hand on the shoulder. "Thank you for calling. I'm going to open an emergency intake. Can I speak with the child briefly, if she's comfortable?" Nate looked to the glass table. Lily watched him from her small country of shadows. He lowered the phone slightly. "This is Emily," he said to Lily, crouching so his eyes were level with the edge. "Her work is to make sure children are safe. Would you like to say hello? You can just listen if you want." Lily weighed the air, then scooted an inch closer. He switched to speakerphone and set the device near the table's edge. "Hi, Lily," Emily said, voice as soft as a lullaby that refused to lie. "Hi," Lily whispered. "You did something very brave tonight," Emily said. "Right now, all you have to do is rest. I'll come meet you soon. Would that be okay?" Lily glanced at Nate, then at Mr. Buttons, then back at the black square of the phone. "Will Mr. Buttons have a place?" Nate answered before the silence could grow teeth. "Always." Emily's smile was almost audible. "Then I think we have a plan." They ended the call with instructions clear and the promise of footsteps that would not hurt on their way. Nate locked the deadbolts, engaged the security system, and adjusted the camera feeds on his wall panel. He dimmed the lights until the room looked like a nest of dusk. When he returned to the table, Lily had curled around her bear, the wool throw folded under her cheek like a petal. The glass above her reflected the city, tiny constellations of elevators, cabs crossing bridges, snow feathering down the sides of black water. He kneeled, slipped a cushion beneath her head, and whispered, "You can have the bedroom." Her eyes opened, bright and startled. Here, I can see everything." He nodded. Then here it is. He sat on the floor beside the table, back to the sofa, and watched the river with her. The quiet between them wasn't empty anymore. It held soup and stars and a phone call that sounded like a door unlocking in a corridor of locked doors. Above the covered piano, the city kept breathing. Somewhere between the glass and the water and the small rise and fall of Lily's shoulders, Nate felt the apartment shift, almost imperceptibly, from showroom to shelter, from echo to hush. He let his head rest against the sofa and kept vigil. Before sleep found her, Lily whispered, so soft he almost missed it. "Thank you for the place." "For you," he answered. "Always for you." And for the first time in 3 years, he believed himself. The morning broke gray, the river a sheet of steel beneath a sky that could not decide if it wanted to snow again. From the penthouse windows, the world looked serene, hushed, but inside Nate Harris's chest, a storm still churned. Sleep had come to him in fragments, shallow and thin, interrupted by every small sound Lily made under the glass table. A cough, a turn, the whisper of fabric as she clutched her bear. Each time he rose, checked the locks, and confirmed the cameras glowed red at their posts. By dawn, he had made up his mind. Hiding her here was not enough. She needed care, not just comfort. She needed proof of what had been done to her. When Lily stirred, blinking awake, the wool throw tangled around her like seaweed, Nate crouched beside her. "Good morning, Lily," he said, voice low, warm. "I thought we'd go somewhere today. Somewhere safe. A doctor, just to make sure you're okay." Her fingers tightened around Mr. Button's. Fear swept through her expression like a shadow across snow. "Doctors. Tell her things." Then she... Lily couldn't finish. Nate shook his head firmly. "Not this doctor. Her name is Rachel Kim. She runs a small clinic on the south side. She helps children who need protection. She's a friend of people I trust. And Emily, remember Emily from last night? She'll meet us there." The girl's eyes searched his face, as if testing for cracks in his promise. Slowly, she nodded. The drive south was quiet. Nate's Mercedes SUV cut through traffic, the city awakening with horns and coffee steam rising from street carts. Lily sat in the back seat, dwarfed by the leather seat. Wrapped in the wool throw, Mr. Buttons propped against the window. Her reflection in the glass looked too fragile for the city that pulsed around them. Nate kept glancing in the rearview mirror, his jaw tightening at each glimpse of the fading bruise beneath her sleeve. The memory of her whisper, "She calls it discipline, but it hurts," echoed in him like a verdict. They pulled up outside a red brick building wedged between a laundromat and a church soup kitchen. The sign above the door read Southside Community Health Clinic. Modest, unassuming, but Nate felt its importance the way a drowning man feels the shore. Inside, the warmth was immediate, not just from the heating vents, but from the walls painted in cheerful colors, the bulletin boards lined with children's drawings. A nurse at the desk recognized Nate instantly. His face had been on enough magazine covers, but said nothing beyond, "Dr. Kim will see you right away." Rachel Kim was in her late 30s, petite, with dark hair tied back and eyes that had learned to read truth beyond words. She greeted Lily first, crouching so their eyes met. "Hi, Lily," she said gently. "I'm Rachel. You can call me Dr. Rachel if that's easier. I hear Mr. Buttons came too." Lily blinked, surprised. Few adults noticed her bear. She held him out shyly. "He watches." "Perfect," Rachel said, taking the bear's paw solemnly. "Then he'll help us today." The exam room was small, walls decorated with faded murals of clouds and stars. Nate sat in the corner, forcing himself to remain still, to let Rachel lead. Lily perched on the table, her legs swinging nervously. Rachel began with simple things, listening to Lily's heart, checking her breathing, asking about favorite foods. Slowly, she eased into the examination. Then she paused, her expression tightening. Along Lily's arms and back, beneath the shirt, were bruises, some fresh, some yellowing. Small scars traced faint stories on her skin, stories no child should carry. Rachel's voice softened, but the steel in it was unmistakable. She turned to Nate. "This isn't an isolated incident. These marks tell me she's been hurt repeatedly over time." Nate felt his chest burn. "How long?" Rachel shook her head. "Hard to say exactly. Weeks, months, maybe longer. This isn't discipline. It's abuse. Clear, chronic abuse." The words struck the air like gavel blows. Nate gripped the arm of the chair, the leather creaking under his hand. He forced himself to look at Lily, not at the fury building in him. She sat small, eyes down, as though expecting to be scolded even here. Rachel knelt in front of Lily again. "Lily, sweetheart, none of this is your fault. Do you understand? Nothing you did made this happen." A tear slipped down Lily's cheek. She whispered, "But she said I was broken. That only broken children get hurt." Nate was out of his chair in an instant, his hand on the edge of the table. "No," he said, his voice breaking. He lowered himself so his face was level with hers. "You are not broken. Do you hear me? You are not broken. You're strong. Stronger than anyone who tried to hurt you." Rachel gave a small nod, affirming his words. Then she stood and pulled out a form from her clipboard. "I'll be filing a mandated report today, with CPS already involved. This will strengthen the emergency petition. Emily should be here shortly." Emily Carter arrived within half an hour, brisk but calm, a satchel of files over her shoulder. She greeted Nate, then bent toward Lily with a smile that seemed to melt walls. "Hello again, Lily. You remember me from the phone last night?" Lily nodded, clutching Mr. Buttons tighter. "I saw Dr. Rachel's notes," Emily continued, her tone professional but touched with quiet fire. "We'll be starting the emergency guardianship process immediately. That means you won't have to go back to Veronica Hayes. You'll be safe until the court decides on permanent placement." Lily's eyes widened, a storm of fear and hope colliding. "She can't find me?" "No," Emily said firmly. "Not if I have anything to do with it. And I promise, I do." Nate exhaled, a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that the nightmare could be turned into record, into evidence, into something that could not be denied. Rachel handed Emily a sealed envelope of medical documentation. "This," she said, "is everything you'll need in court. Photographs, notes, my medical statement. No judge can look at this and call it discipline." Emily glanced at Nate. "We'll need you as guardian ad litem for now. Are you prepared for that responsibility?" Nate didn't hesitate. "I'll do whatever it takes." He looked back at Lily, who sat on the exam table hugging her bear, small but luminous in her resilience. In her eyes, he saw the echo of his son's gaze, not in appearance, but in the raw, unspoken plea. "Don't let me down." "I promise you," he whispered, words like an oath binding him. "You're never going back there. Not as long as I'm alive." That afternoon, when they left the clinic, snow had begun to fall again, dusting the streets of South Side in fragile lace. Nate held Lily's hand as they walked to the car. Her steps were small, but steadier than the night before. Behind them, Emily's voice lingered with the weight of truth. "This isn't a one-time wound. This is a history. and history demands justice. Nate looked down at Lily, her wool throw wrapped around her shoulders, Mr. Buttons tucked under her arm. She looked up at him, her eyes searching, and this time she did not look away. Snow had softened the city overnight, and by morning the world beyond the penthouse windows looked powdered in sugar. The Chicago River ran dark and slow beneath its crust of ice, barges pushing like shadows against the current. Inside, however, warmth had begun to stir where silence once lived. Nathaniel Nate Harris moved quietly through the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hair still damp from the shower. He had never been a man of kitchens. For years, staff had prepared his meals, or he had eaten alone at restaurants that charged too much for food he hardly tasted. But this morning, he was determined. Lily Anderson deserved a breakfast that said, "You're home now. You're safe." He cracked eggs into a bowl, whisking clumsily, shell fragments floating like tiny boats he fished out with his fingers. A stack of flour, sugar, and milk stood ready on the counter, ingredients he had Googled at 2 a.m., while Lily slept curled beneath the glass dining table. He had typed how to make pancakes for kids and watched a video hosted by a cheerful grandmother with a Minnesota accent. Now, standing in his sleek marble kitchen, he whispered the steps like prayers. Whisk. Don't overmix. Let the batter rest. Behind him came the faintest sound, a yawn, a shuffle of socked feet. He turned. Lily appeared in the doorway, still wrapped in the wool throw, her hair tangled from sleep, Mr. Buttons tucked under one arm. Her eyes, though wary, held a spark of curiosity at the smell of butter heating on the pan. "Morning," Nate said softly. "I was about to commit pancake crimes. You might have to be my official judge." Lily tilted her head, unsure whether to smile. She padded closer, climbing onto one of the tall stools by the island, her small legs swinging. Mr. Buttons was placed ceremoniously on the counter to watch. "Do you like pancakes?" Nate asked, pouring batter into imperfect circles. She shrugged, almost apologetic. "Never had them." Nate froze. He looked at her as if she'd said she'd never seen the sun. "Well," he said, voice catching, "today's the day." The first pancake came out lopsided, edges crisp, middle doughy. He slid it onto a plate and set it before her with a flourish. "Behold, the Harris House Special." Lily poked it with her fork, skeptical. She took a bite, chewed, and made a face. "It's weird." Nate's heart sank until she burst, truly burst, into a small laugh. A real laugh, high and quick, like a bird darting through branches. She covered her mouth with her hand, giggling. "You're bad at this." Nate blinked, stunned. He hadn't heard a child laugh in his home since his son Daniel. For a heartbeat, the sound cut through every layer of grief, every wall he had built. His lips curved, unpracticed, into a smile. "Yes," he admitted, chuckling. "I'm terrible, but maybe you can teach me." He handed her the whisk. Together they mixed a second batch, Lily concentrating fiercely as she stirred. "Not too much," she instructed, repeating the YouTube grandma's advice Nate had muttered earlier. He realized she had been listening all along. The next pancake landed golden, fluffy, steaming. Lily cut a piece, tasted it, and her eyes widened. "Better," she declared. Mouth full. "Much better." Nate exhaled a laugh that felt like release. "Then you're officially in charge of pancakes from now on." For the first time since he had met her, the shadow of fear eased from Lily's shoulders. She ate with growing appetite, Mr. Buttons propped against the plate as though joining the feast. After breakfast, Nate fetched paper and crayons he'd hastily bought at a drugstore the night before. He placed them on the table. "Every great chef needs an artist's break," he said. Want to draw? Lily's fingers hovered over the crayons, uncertain. Slowly, she chose a blue one and began sketching. Lines curved, shapes formed. When she slid the paper toward him, Nate felt his breath hitch. It was a picture of 3 figures, a tall man, a little girl, and above them, a woman drawn in soft strokes of yellow, with a glowing circle around her head. "That's my dad," Lily said, pointing to the man. Then she tapped the girl. "That's me." She lifted her eyes. "And that's Mom. She's in the sky, but she watches." Nate swallowed hard. "It's beautiful," he whispered. Before he could say more, the elevator chimed. Nate tensed instinctively. The security system had allowed only one visitor that morning, Emily Carter from CPS. Still, his pulse spiked. He checked the monitor, confirmed it was Emily, and opened the door. Emily stepped in with her satchel, stamping snow from her boots. She smiled warmly at Lily. "Good morning, sweetheart. How are you feeling today?" Lily glanced at Nate, then whispered, "We made pancakes." Emily's smile deepened. "That sounds wonderful. Maybe you'll teach me sometime." But before the warmth could settle, Lily froze. She had looked past Emily, toward the street visible through the wall of windows. Her body stiffened, fork clattering to the floor. Nate followed her gaze and saw a woman across the street standing too still, her coat pristine against the snow. Her eyes lifted to the penthouse windows, and even from a distance, Nate caught the sharp curve of her smile. Veronica Hayes. Lily's breath hitched, panic flooding her face. "She's here," she whispered, voice trembling. Nate's chest locked with fury. He stepped in front of the glass as if his body could shield Lily from sight. "You're safe," he told her, fierce and certain. "She can't touch you. Not here." Emily moved swiftly, pulling out her phone. "I'll call it in. We'll document everything. She has no legal ground right now, none. Stay calm, Nate. Keep Lily close." Behind him, Lily buried her face into Mr. Button's, trembling. Yet in her drawing on the table, the little family she had imagined remained. Father, daughter, mother watching from above. A fragile promise sketched in crayon, daring to be real. And in that moment, Nate vowed silently, "No one will tear this away, not ever again." The night was restless, the city muffled under heavy snow that pressed against the glass walls of the penthouse. Chicago, from this high, looked silent, almost holy, as though the world below had been frozen mid-step. Yet inside Nathaniel, Nate Harris's home, unease gnawed at every corner. He had tried to restore a sense of calm after Lily's panic that morning. Emily Carter had stayed for hours, contacting her office, documenting Veronica Hayes' presence outside. Eventually, Veronica disappeared into the crowd, but her shadow lingered in Lily's mind. Nate had tucked the girl into the guest bedroom, reading from a worn copy of Goodnight Moon until her eyes closed. But fear, once planted, did not sleep easily. It was past midnight when Nate finally leaned back on the sofa, exhaustion dragging at him. The penthouse lights were dimmed, the only glow from the skyline beyond the windows. Just as his eyes began to close, a faint sound reached him, the whisper of paper against wood. He rose instantly, muscles tense. At the front door lay a small, folded note, slid under the frame. His security system had detected nothing, no alarm, no breach. Yet someone had come close enough to touch his door. Nate bent, picked it up. His name was not written on the outside, only a jagged scrawl. "The girl is mine. You cannot keep her." The letters bled with fury, strokes heavy and uneven as though carved with a trembling hand. His jaw clenched, fury and dread tangling into one. Behind him, a soft sound. A whimper. Lily stood in the hallway, her blanket trailing like a shadow. Mr. Buttons dangled from her hand. Her eyes locked on the note, and she froze. "She left it," Lily whispered, her voice hollow. "She always leaves notes when she's angry." Nate crushed the paper in his fist. "Not anymore. This ends here." But Lily shook her head violently, stepping back. "She'll take me away. She said, no one can stop her." Nate knelt, placing both hands gently on her shoulders. "Listen to me, Lily. She won't touch you. She won't hurt you. Not while I breathe." Tears streaked Lily's cheeks. "But the notes mean punishment. I can't." Her words broke into sobs, her small frame shaking. Nate pulled her close, wrapping her in his arms, feeling how impossibly small she was inside his embrace. He guided her to the living room and sat with her near the fire, where warmth painted her skin in soft gold. "Let me tell you something," Nate said, reaching for a book from the shelf. It was one he hadn't touched in years. The Velveteen Rabbit. He opened it, his voice steady despite the ache in his throat. This is about a toy bunny who wanted to be real. And he learned that being real happens when someone truly loves you. Even when you're old and worn, love makes you real. Lily sniffled, clutching Mr. Buttons tighter. "Is he real?" "Yes," Nate said firmly. "Because you love him, and because I love you." The words slipped out before he could stop them. He felt Lily stiffen, then relax slowly, her breath evening out. She leaned against him, whispering so faint he almost didn't hear. "I forgot what that feels like." The hours crawled, but by dawn, Lily had fallen into an uneasy sleep against his chest. Nate laid her gently on the sofa, covered her with the wool throw, and returned to the crumpled note on the table. By daylight, it looked almost pitiful, a scrap of rage dressed as power. But he knew better. Veronica Hayes was escalating. First surveillance, now threats. What would come next? When Emily arrived that morning, Nate handed her the note. She read it, her mouth tightening. "This is harassment. We'll submit it as evidence along with security reports. I'll request immediate protective orders from the court." "She's escalating," Nate said. "And Lily can't endure another second of this." Emily nodded gravely. "Hold steady. The system works slowly, but with each piece of evidence, our case strengthens. Don't underestimate what Lily's testimony, combined with this note, will mean." That afternoon, Nate found Lily in the living room with her crayons spread across the rug. She was drawing again, lines quick and urgent. When he knelt to look, his heart cracked. She had drawn their penthouse high above the river, but outside the door stood a figure in dark strokes. Veronica, towering, with hands like claws. Inside, she had sketched herself curled into a corner, Mr. Buttons beside her. And then, in brighter colors, a tall figure stood between them. Nate, arms spread wide, blocking the door. Lily looked up at him, her eyes enormous. "Will you really stand there? Even if she comes inside?" "Yes," Nate said, his voice steady as stone. "Especially then." She held out the picture, trembling. "Then this is real?" Nate took it gently as though it were a contract written in crayon. "Yes, Lily. This is real." For the first time since he had met her, she took a bite of food without hesitation. Small, but enough. The shadow of Veronica's threat still lingered, but something had shifted. Fear no longer ruled alone. It had to share space with trust. That night, as snow thickened against the city and silence deepened, Nate set the crayon drawing on the mantel beside the family photo of his wife and son. 2 worlds, 2 promises, both binding, both sacred. The letter under the door had been meant to break them. Instead, it forged a vow. No matter what Veronica Hayes tried, Lily would never again face her nightmares alone. And in the quiet, with Lily asleep at last, Nate whispered into the fire, "This house is hers now, too, and I will not let it fall." The storm eased by evening, but the penthouse still carried the hush of falling snow. Outside, Chicago sparkled in winter's grip, the lights along Wacker Drive gleaming like strings of fireflies. Inside, Nate Harris sat at his desk, papers spread before him, legal notes from Emily Carter, CPS files, and the crumpled threat Veronica Hayes had slid under his door. He should have been reading, preparing for the legal storm ahead. But his eyes kept drifting toward the corner of the room where Lily Anderson was curled up with Mr. Buttons and a box of crayons. She hummed faintly as she drew, her small hand steadying the paper while the other traced bright strokes across it. For a child who had endured so much, her concentration was fierce, almost protective. Nate watched quietly, marveling at the fragile normalcy of it. Then Lily looked up. "Do you have music?" The question startled him. "Music?" She nodded, twirling the crayon between her fingers. "Mommy used to play when storms came. Piano music. It made the house not so loud." Nate's gaze flicked to the far corner of the penthouse, where a grand piano sat covered in canvas. His late wife, Clara, had played it often, filling the apartment with melodies he had since buried in silence. He hadn't uncovered it in 3 years. "Yes," he said slowly. "There's a piano." Lily's eyes brightened faintly. "Could you play something? Please?" His throat tightened. He hadn't touched those keys since the night before the accident. But as he met Lily's hopeful eyes, he felt something shift. Rising, he crossed to the instrument, pulling away the cover. Dust floated in the lamplight like memories returning. He sat, lifted the lid, and let his fingers hover. They trembled. "I'm not very good," he murmured. "That's okay," Lily whispered. "It doesn't have to be perfect. Just real." Nate pressed a key, the sound trembling through the stillness. Another followed, then a chord. Slowly, muscle memory stirred. He began to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Clara's favorite. The melody unfurled like a ribbon through the room, fragile, haunting, but alive. Lily's face softened, her eyes glistening. She hugged Mr. Buttons and whispered, "Mommy used to hum this when the thunder was loud." The song carried him back. Clara sitting at this very piano, Daniel asleep on the couch, laughter spilling into music. For the first time in years, the notes did not feel like ghosts. They felt like offerings. When the last chord faded, silence followed, but it was not empty. It was warm, layered with breath and memory. Lily climbed down from her seat, walked to him, and slipped a folded piece of paper into his hand. "This is for you," she said softly. Nate unfolded it. The drawing showed a garage, dark, heavy lines marking shadows. Inside, a small figure sat curled up, clutching a bear. But outside the door, a tall man stood drawn in bright yellow, a glow surrounding him, holding the door open. Nate's chest ached. "Lily, what is this?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "That's you. You opened the door. You're the light. I forgot what it was like to be loved until you found me." Nate couldn't speak. He set the drawing carefully on the piano and turned to her. Without thinking, he pulled her into his arms. Lily stiffened at first, then melted against him, her small body trembling. "I don't know how to be anyone's light," Nate whispered against her hair, his voice raw. but I'll learn. With you. She pulled back just enough to look at him, her cheeks flushed. We can learn together. For the first time, Lily's arms circled his neck, holding tight. Nate felt something ignite in his chest, not just duty, not just protection, but a bond. Fragile, yet unbreakable. Later that night, after Lily had fallen asleep in the guest bed, Nate returned to the piano. He laid her drawing on the music stand beside the Chopin sheet he had pulled from memory. 2 testaments, one of past love, one of new promise. He pressed a single note, letting it linger in the air. The city lights blinked back at him, steady as a vow. And Nate knew. Veronica Hayes could threaten, she could rage, she could scheme. But she could not erase this. Lily had given him something no court could grant, no enemy could take. Trust. And trust was stronger than fear. The storm returned with a vengeance that night. Snow lashed against the tall glass walls of the penthouse, the wind whistling like an uninvited guest. From the 48th floor, Chicago looked swallowed in white, bridges and buildings fading into blur. Nathaniel Nate Harris double-checked the locks, reset the alarms, and scanned every corner of his security feed. He had grown used to control, numbers, contracts, skyscrapers that bent to his vision. But nothing in his empire had prepared him for the fragility of a 7-year-old girl sleeping down the hall. Lily Anderson had fallen asleep clutching Mr. Buttons, her chest rising in soft rhythms. Earlier, she had insisted on placing her drawing, the one of Nate glowing at the garage door, on the nightstand. "So I remember I'm not alone," she had whispered. Nate kissed her forehead before switching off the lamp. He lingered at the door longer than he admitted to himself, unwilling to leave. At midnight, the penthouse was cloaked in silence. Then, a metallic snap. The unmistakable scrape of a lock giving way. Nate's blood surged. He moved quickly, barefoot on marble, every sense sharpened. The security system hadn't triggered. Whoever it was knew how to bypass it. The door slammed inward, snow curling in. A figure stumbled through, her voice jagged with rage. "Where is she?" Veronica Hayes. Her coat whipped open, hair damp with snow, eyes wild with a fury that almost glowed. She staggered forward, screaming, "She's mine! You can't steal her from me!" "Stay back," Nate barked, planting himself in the center of the room. His voice filled the penthouse, low and commanding. "Lily isn't yours. Not anymore." From down the hall came a cry, sharp with terror. "Lily!" Nate spun, racing to the guest room. Veronica lunged after him, but he reached the door first. He threw it open to find Lily standing on the bed, trembling, clutching her bear like a shield. "Chew, Nate!" she screamed. "Into the safe room," Nate ordered, scooping her up. Hidden behind a panel in the bedroom closet was a reinforced chamber, originally designed for valuables, not children. Tonight it would serve as both. He pressed the code with shaking fingers, the panel sliding open. "Stay here. Do not come out until I open this door." "Do you hear me?" Lily's eyes brimmed with tears. "She'll hurt you!" Nate pressed her small hand against his chest. "Not tonight. Not ever again." He kissed her hair, set her inside, and closed the door. The lock engaged with a heavy click. He turned just as Veronica stormed into the room, her voice breaking into a scream. "You think you can take her from me? I raised her. She's mine to teach, mine to discipline." "Discipline?" Nate's fury rose like fire. "You call bruises discipline? You left her in the snow to freeze." "She's weak," Veronica spat, her face twisting. "I was making her strong." Nate stepped forward, towering. "No. You were breaking her. but she's stronger than you'll ever be, and she will never live under your cruelty again." Veronica lunged, nails slashing, but Nate caught her wrists, steel against chaos. He forced her back into the living room, each step heavy with rage and resolve. Then, sirens. Red and blue lights strobed against the snow outside. The door burst open again, this time with authority. "Chicago police! Drop your hands!" Two officers stormed in, weapons raised, followed by Emily Carter, her coat flung over a suit, breath steaming from the cold. Nate released Veronica instantly, stepping back with hands raised. "She broke in," he said, voice ragged. "She threatened the child." Veronica thrashed against the officers as they wrenched her arms behind her. "She's mine! She belongs to me!" Emily's face was hard as stone. "No, Veronica! You lost that right the moment you chose violence over care." Lily's cries echoed from the safe room. Nate hurried to the bedroom, pressed the code, and opened the door. Lily flew into his arms, burying her face in his neck. He held her tight, whispering over and over, "It's over. You're safe. I've got you." Back in the living room, the officers dragged Veronica through the door, her shouts fading into the storm. Silence settled in their wake, broken only by Lily's sobs and Nate's steady heartbeat beneath her ear. Emily approached, her eyes softening. "You did the right thing," she said quietly, "and you just gave the court the clearest proof it needs. This will end in your favor, Nate. For her." Nate nodded, his arms tightening around Lily. He looked down at the child trembling in his hold and made a vow in his heart. No lock, no law, no storm will ever let her face darkness alone again. And for the first time, Lily believed him. Morning arrived with a cold clarity after the storm. The city below sparkled under a fresh blanket of snow, each rooftop glazed in light, but inside the penthouse, the air was heavy with what had happened the night before. The echoes of Veronica Hayes's screams still clung to the walls. For Nathaniel Nate Harris, there was no illusion left. This was no longer about hiding Lily. It was about fighting for her. The living room table, once a showpiece of glass and steel, had transformed overnight into a war table. Legal pads stacked beside plates of half-eaten toast, CPS documents spilled across polished marble, and at the center sat Lily's crayon drawing of their little family, a reminder of why they were doing this. Lily sat at the far end, crayons scattered before her, sketching quietly as Mr. Buttons leaned against the sugar jar like a silent juror. Emily Carter paced nearby, her satchel open, papers spread like wings. Across from Nate sat Mark Sullivan, a children's rights attorney Emily had brought in, a man in his 50s, silver-haired, his tie loosened, but his gaze sharp. Mark adjusted his glasses and tapped the stack of files. "We have everything we need. Dr. Kim's medical reports, photographs of the bruises, CPS intake records, the threatening note, and last night's police report. That break-in will carry enormous weight with the judge." Emily nodded. Veronica didn't just cross a line. She destroyed her credibility in front of law enforcement. No court will see her as a fit guardian now. Nate leaned forward, voice steady but raw. "What happens next?" Mark folded his hands. "The hearing is scheduled for 3 days from now in Cook County Court. Veronica's lawyer will argue she's the legal stepmother and has provided care. They'll try to paint you as a wealthy man exploiting the system to take a child who isn't yours." "Exploiting?" Nate's jaw tightened. "I've done nothing but protect her." "That's why we'll win," Mark said calmly. "The law bends toward evidence, not theatrics. And we have evidence stacked higher than their claims." He turned toward Lily, who had been listening quietly, her crayon stilled. "But her voice will matter too. Judges listen to children, especially when they're this clear." Lily looked up, wide-eyed. Do I have to talk in front of her? Emily crouched beside her. You'll be in a safe room with the judge, not in front of Veronica. You can bring Mr. Buttons if you want. You'll just tell the truth. Lily hugged her bear tighter. But the truth makes her angry. Nate leaned closer, his voice firm yet gentle. Not this time, Lily. This time the truth makes you free. The room fell quiet, his words settling like a vow. Later that afternoon, preparations took on rhythm. Emily organized the files into color-coded folders. Mark rehearsed possible questions with Nate. Lily, perched on the couch, watched them, sometimes interrupting with small but piercing observations. What if she lies? Lily asked once. She will, Mark replied without hesitation. But lies unravel when the truth is stronger. That's why your drawings, your words, and your courage matter. Lily tilted her head, uncertain. Drawings? Mark smiled and picked up one she had left on the table. 3 figures holding hands beneath a sun. This is testimony too. A child's voice comes in many forms. He slid it back carefully. Don't underestimate what you create. Nate studied Lily's expression as she processed his words. She was still a child haunted by shadows, but beneath it he saw a resilience taking shape. A spine forged in survival, now beginning to stand straight. That night, after Emily and Mark left, Nate found Lily in the kitchen, her hands busy arranging crackers for Mr. Buttons on a napkin. Big meeting tomorrow? She asked innocently. Day after, Nate corrected, crouching to meet her eye level. But yes, it's important. Important like the tallest building important? Or important like pancakes important? Nate smiled despite himself. Both. Because it decides whether this home can stay yours. She frowned. Yours too. Her correction pierced him. He reached out, brushing a lock of hair from her face. Ours, he said. This home is ours. Lily's gaze softened. She reached for a crayon and quickly sketched on a scrap of paper. She handed it to him. A house with 2 figures inside, a man and a girl, and floating above them, a woman drawn in gentle yellow light. Across the top she had written, in shaky letters, Forever. Mark's words returned to him. A child's voice comes in many forms. Nate folded the drawing carefully, sliding it into his jacket pocket. Then we'll show them this. We'll show them everything. Lily smiled faintly, for the first time without fear shadowing it. By midnight, the penthouse was still, snow drifting against the windows. Nate sat at the piano, Lily's drawing propped against the music stand. He pressed a single note, then another, letting Chopin's nocturne drift softly through the rooms. From down the hall, Lily's small voice carried sleepily, That's the sound of home. Nate's chest ached, but it was a good ache, the kind that came with healing. He kept playing, the melody carrying them both toward the battle ahead. Snow clung to the stone steps of the Cook County Courthouse, packed down by the feet of lawyers, clerks, and families hurrying inside. The building loomed against the pale Chicago sky, its neoclassical columns weathered by decades of trials and verdicts. For Nathaniel Nate Harris, it felt less like a courthouse and more like an arena. He tightened his scarf against the cold wind and glanced down at the small hand in his. Lily Anderson walked beside him, her coat zipped to her chin, Mr. Buttons tucked under one arm. She held herself stiff, like a soldier about to march into battle. Her eyes scanned the steps, the doors, the people streaming in and out. When her gaze met his, Nate gave her hand a squeeze. "We're together," he said quietly. She nodded, whispering back, "Together." Inside, the courthouse hummed with voices and footsteps, the faint smell of old wood and ink. Emily Carter led the way, her satchel filled with documents. Mark Sullivan, their attorney, carried a thin leather briefcase, his calm presence like ballast against the storm ahead. The hearing was assigned to courtroom 302, a chamber paneled in dark oak. The judge, a woman with iron-gray hair and a voice sharp as a gavel, presided from the bench. At one table sat Nate, Emily, and Mark, with Lily close to Nate's side. At the other sat Veronica Hayes, her posture stiff, her eyes burning with venom. Beside her, a sharp-suited attorney whispered strategy. The bailiff called the room to order. Case of Anderson versus Hayes regarding guardianship of minor child, Lily Anderson. The words made Nate's heart hammer. This wasn't just a case. It was Lily's life. Veronica's lawyer opened with a polished speech. Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Hayes, is the lawful stepmother of Lily Anderson. She has provided care, shelter, and schooling for the child since her father's death. This attempt by Mr. Harris, a man with no blood relation, to take Lily is nothing more than overreach, exploiting his wealth and influence. Nate's jaw tightened, but Mark placed a steadying hand on his arm. Wait, the attorney whispered. We'll answer with facts. When it was their turn, Mark rose. His voice carried not theatrics, but a calm weight that filled the room. Your Honor, this is not about wealth. This is about safety. The evidence will show that Lily suffered repeated abuse under Veronica Hayes' care. Medical reports, photographs, testimony from Dr. Rachel Kim, CPS documentation, and even direct threats. This is not speculation. It is proof. He gestured toward the stack of exhibits. Emily stepped forward, submitting the files. The judge leafed through them, her expression tightening. Then came the photographs. Dr. Kim's documentation of Lily's bruises, the medical notes describing scarring consistent with repeated trauma. The courtroom hushed. Veronica shifted in her chair, her jaw twitching. The threatening note was read aloud. The girl is mine. You cannot keep her. Gasps rippled across the room. Mark pressed on, recounting the police report of Veronica's break-in, the officer's sworn statements about her violent outburst. Veronica's lawyer scrambled. These are misunderstandings, discipline taken out of context. Every child has scrapes and bruises. Bruises on the back? On the ribs? Mark interrupted sharply. A child left in freezing temperatures on Christmas Eve? That's not discipline. That's cruelty. The judge's gavel struck once. Counsel will not dismiss evidence as misunderstanding. Proceed. At last, it was Lily's turn. Emily accompanied her to the judge's chambers, away from Veronica's glare. Nate waited in the courtroom, his hands clenched, his breath shallow. Minutes passed like hours. Inside, the judge leaned forward gently. Lily, you don't need to be afraid. Just tell me the truth. Who makes you feel safe? Lily clutched Mr. Buttons and spoke softly but clearly. She's not my mom. My mom is in heaven. Mommy never hurt me. But Veronica does. She says I'm broken. But with Mr. Nate, I don't feel broken. I feel home. The judge's eyes softened. And do you want to stay with Mr. Nate? Lily nodded firmly. Yes, forever. She held up her drawing, a house with 3 figures, a man, a girl, and a woman in yellow light above them. Across the top, forever. Emily later told Nate that the judge held the drawing in her hand for a long time before nodding gravely. When Lily returned, she ran straight to Nate, climbing into his lap. He held her close, whispering, "You did so well. I'm proud of you." The judge cleared her throat. Silence swept the room. This court has reviewed the evidence and testimony, she began. The medical documentation, CPS reports and the child's own statements are clear. Veronica Hayes is hereby barred from custody or contact with Lily Anderson. Permanent guardianship is granted to Nathaniel Harris. The gavel struck. So ordered. Lily gasped, her arms tightening around Nate's neck. Tears spilled down her cheeks, not of fear but of release. Nate held her close, his vision blurring. Across the room, Veronica erupted, her voice shrill. "You can't take her from me!" The bailiff stepped in, escorting her out as her shouts faded into nothing. Emily smiled through tears. Mark exhaled, closing his briefcase. "You did it, Nate," he said quietly. "You gave her back her childhood." Nate shook his head, pressing his cheek against Lily's hair. "No," he whispered. "She gave me back my life." Outside the courthouse, the snow had stopped. The city gleamed under a fragile winter sun. Nate carried Lily down the steps, her arms looped around his shoulders. She whispered into his ear, voice steady, "We're really home now, aren't we?" He nodded. "Yes, Lily, we're home." And for the first time, both of them believed it completely. Rose Hill Cemetery lay hushed under a quilt of white. Snow softened the gravestones into quiet shapes, while the branches of old oaks bowed low as if in reverence. Nathaniel Nate Harris walked slowly along the path, his boots crunching in the snow. In his arms, bundled against the cold, Lily Anderson clutched Mr. Buttons and a folded piece of paper she had colored with crayons. They stopped before a granite headstone etched with the name David Anderson. Fresh snow had gathered at its base. But Nate bent down, brushing it away with a gloved hand. Lily knelt, her small fingers tracing her father's name. "Hi, Daddy," she whispered, her breath fogging in the winter air. "I'm safe now. I wanted you to know." She unfolded her drawing and laid it gently against the stone. It showed 3 figures holding hands in front of a house, Lily, Nate, and above them a woman glowing in yellow light, her halo shimmering with hope. Across the top, written in shaky letters, was one word: forever. Nate stood behind her, throat tight, the wind biting at his face. "You would be proud of her, David," he murmured. "She's stronger than anyone I've ever known, and I promise you, I'll protect her with everything I am." Lily looked up at him, her cheeks flushed pink from the cold. "Daddy's in heaven, but now I have you here." Nate knelt beside her, pulling her close. "You'll always have me." For a moment, the cemetery seemed less like a place of endings, and more like a place where promises took root. That evening, the penthouse no longer felt like a glass museum overlooking the Chicago River. It had been transformed. A tree stood in the corner, its branches dressed in lights and ornaments Emily Carter and Dr. Rachel Kim had helped Lily hang. A garland wrapped around the banister, and the scent of cinnamon filled the kitchen where cookies cooled on trays. Emily arrived with her husband and 2 children. Rachel brought soup and bread, and Mark Sullivan carried a bottle of sparkling cider. They crowded into the kitchen, voices overlapping, laughter rising. For the first time in years, the penthouse rang with warmth. Lily, wearing a sweater 2 sizes too big, darted between them, handing out cookies. She stopped beside Nate, tugging his sleeve. "Can we light the star now?" He lifted her easily, setting her on his shoulders. Together they placed the star at the top of the tree. As the lights flickered to life, the room erupted in cheers. Lily beamed, her smile bright enough to rival the city lights beyond the window. Later, as the guests settled, Nate sat on the couch, Lily curled against him with Mr. Buttons. The glow of the tree cast the room in soft gold. Lily traced circles on his hand absent-mindedly. "Is this what Christmas is supposed to feel like?" she asked softly. "Yes," Nate said. "This is what family feels like." She tilted her head, thoughtful. Then we'll keep it. Every year. Forever. Forever, Nate echoed. Near midnight, when the others had gone and the city had quieted, Nate carried Lily to her bed. She was half asleep, her hair falling across her face. He tucked her in, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Merry Christmas, Lily." Her eyes fluttered open just enough to whisper back, "Merry Christmas, Daddy." The words stunned him, filling his chest with a warmth so fierce it brought tears to his eyes. He brushed her hair back and let the words settle, not correcting it, not denying it. He accepted it as truth. He stood at the doorway for a long time, watching her breathe, the soft rise and fall of a child who finally slept without fear. The penthouse, once a tomb of silence, now pulsed with life. Outside, the city lights sparkled against the snow, but inside, something brighter burned, love restored, a family reborn. And as Nate turned off the light, the word she had given him still echoed in his heart. Daddy. It was not just a name. It was a gift, one that promised this Christmas, and every Christmas to come, would never again be lonely. A Christmas forever. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this journey. If Lily and Nate's story touched your heart, please subscribe for more healing stories of hope, love, and second chances. Together, let's keep reminding the world that family is not just about blood, it's about love.